Hello and welcome to part 3 of the Transgender Education Workshop. In the past video, we talked about transgender experiences, transitioning, we went over the privilege check activity. In this one, we're going to do a little bit of sensitivity training. We're going to go over do's, don'ts, and whys. And then we're also going to be talking about some wrapping up activities that will test the knowledge that you have gained during this presentation and also, kind of test how comfortable you are with working with transgender individuals in a professional space. So starting off, we're going to go over the do's, don'ts, and whys. This paper is part of your packet. It looks like this. It's several pages. It's things that you should say, things you shouldn't say, and an explanation of why that is how it is. I'm not going to go over every single thing that is on this paper, but I am going to go over the don't says and the do says. So something that you shouldn't say is hermaphrodite. This term is outdated. What you were trying to say, what you're trying to convey, and what you should say is intersex person. Something that we covered in a previous video, the concept of someone who is born female or male or someone who is female or male bodied. What you're trying to say, a better way to say this, is assigned male or female at birth. Another thing that should be avoided is the idea and phrase of becoming a man or becoming a woman. For me personally, when I started taking hormones, when I had, the surgery that I have had, that was not me becoming a man. I have always been male. When I was younger, I didn't have the vocabulary or the knowledge to explain that. But I have always been male. And so me transitioning didn't make me more or less of a man. It was just part of my transition process. And so in that, I didn't become a man, I transitioned. Something else that should be avoided is when referring to someone saying that they are a gay or a transgender. You should say a gay person or a transgender person, as gay and transgender are adjectives. They are not nouns. They do not solely defy, who or what a person is. They are still people. And so you should instead say a gay person or a transgender person. This is something we covered in the first video, the concept of transgender people and normal people. What you are meaning to say is transgender people and cisgender people. People who aren't transgender, the word for that is cisgender. Another don't, ladies and gentlemen. This seems perfectly fine, perfectly innocuous. But when you are saying ladies and gentlemen, you are actually excluding non-binary people from your greeting. You are, in your words saying, only ladies and gentlemen are welcome at this event. But if someone does not fall into either of those two categories, you are saying that you are not welcoming them into this space. There, are some alternatives on this paper. You could say honored guest, everyone, folks, honored guests, we welcome you here today. Instead of ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you here today, and similar things like that. When writing about someone who is not gendered, in writing or being ambiguous about someone's gender, people will say, oh, he or she. Instead, you can just use singular they, and this is something that was also covered in previous videos. Singular they is a perfect word to use describing someone of, an unknown gender identity, someone whose gender identity might be outside of the binary, or if you just want to keep things ambiguous, you can use singular they. Something that also is used a lot in conversation is both genders. People are like, oh, both genders are welcome at this event. When you are saying both, again, you are implying that the only genders that exist are male and female. And usually when people are saying both genders, they are also excluding binary transgender people from conversations and events. Instead, you should say all genders, because gender is not a binary. There isn't just two genders. Moving on, another thing of transgendered. Again, transgender is an adjective. When you are saying, oh, transgendered, you are making it a verb. What you mean to say is a transgender person, or in the case of multiple people, transgender people. Something else that is commonly used in conversation or used when asking questions is the phrase fully transitioned. Like, oh, have you fully transitioned? Or, oh, that person is fully transitioned. Usually what people mean when they are saying fully transitioned, they are referring to some kind of sex change operation. And like I said before, sex change operations are not required for being transgender. They do not suddenly make you a man or make you a woman. And the concept of fully transitioned is different for everybody else. Some people might reach a point and they're like, cool, I'm not going to do anything additional for my transition. And that point might just be a middle point for someone else. There might be other procedures or other things that they, want to do, whether socially or medically, to transition. So fully transitioned isn't really a thing. It's not something that can be applied universally across the board. Sometimes when, transgender people come out to others, people will say, oh, you don't look transgender. What you're saying by this, and usually it's, accompanied by a compliment. Oh my God, like you're so handsome, you're so beautiful, like you don't look transgender, I would have never known. What you were saying is, one, that all transgender people look the same. Two, that you can tell if someone is transgender just by looking at them. And three, when accompanied by those compliments, you were saying that all transgender people are inherently not good looking. None of those things are true. Not all transgender people look the same. You can't tell if someone is transgender just by looking at them. And transgender people exist in a myriad of looks and facial features and all of these different things. And there is nothing inherently ugly about being a transgender individual. So there aren't alternatives for some of these phrases. They're just things that you shouldn't say because they are rude and offensive. And I don't think that that is always people's intention, but it's good to know how what you're saying comes across to the people you are talking to. And then another thing, kind of going back to fully transition, some people say the surgery. Oh, have you had the surgery? There are probably 10 or more surgeries that exist, at least in the United States, relating to being transgender. There are many different types of gender affirming surgeries. There's not just one surgery. What most people mean when they are saying the surgery is they mean sexual reassignment or realignment surgery. They mean bottom surgery, surgery that takes place on your genitals. And, talking about someone's surgeries, asking someone what surgeries they've had is none of your business. If you are a medical provider and you need to know someone's surgery experience, for intake paperwork, or because they're having another surgery, you need to know about reactions to different medications, different experiences. You can ask someone, oh, like, have you had any surgeries? But asking someone if they've had the surgery is just overall incorrect and not something that you need to know about or need to ask about. So before asking a transgender person a question, whether, it's a question relating to the do's, don'ts, and whys, or something else that you think of, you should probably ask yourself the following. 1, is this any of my business? 2, is me gaining this information necessary? And 3, is this information that I would ask of a non-transgender person in this situation? A lot of times transgender people are asked extremely personal, invasive questions, whether that's about our genitalia, our sex lives, our families and past trauma, all of those things. Is that something that you would bring up to a stranger or even a friend, if they weren't transgender? The same social rules that apply to cisgender people also apply to transgender people. So if you wouldn't ask someone these kinds of personal invasive questions if they weren't transgender, you probably shouldn't ask them to a transgender person. And branching off of that, sometimes transgender people will, disclose the fact that they are transgender. They will come out to people they know, whether that's friends, family, coworkers. Before you, as someone who has been, someone has disclosed that they are transgender, before you go and tell other individuals that that person is transgender, you need to ask yourself the following. Has the transgender individual in question given me explicit permission that it's okay if I tell others about their transgender identity? And the reason why asking this and knowing this is important is because sometimes transgender people will be out to certain people and then not be out to others, or, they might be presenting as female and, most people wouldn't immediately assume that they are transgender. And sometimes they're not going to disclose, that information to people that they don't know super well. And this is a safety risk. This is a health risk. There are so many acts of transgender violence, violence against transgender people committed every day in America, whether that is street harassment, whether that is assault, up to murder. These kinds of things happen in our communities. They happen all over the country. They happen all over the world. And so if someone has not given you explicit permission, for me, I always tell people, you can go ahead and tell people I'm trans. I don't care. I don't care who knows that I'm transgender. I'm open about that. But not everyone is. And sometimes people don't disclose that because of health and safety reasons. And that's something that's really important to keep in mind. So now moving on from that, we're going to move on to the test your knowledge section of the workshop. And again, all of this stuff is in the packet. Again, I'm going to show you the front page, what that looks like. The Transgender Education Workshop packet looks like this. This is something that's really important, especially for these next few activities. So first we're going to start off with the patient intake form. You should have a copy of this in your packet. It looks like this. And the activity here is, based on, the information that you already have, the information you've learned during this workshop. Go over this intake paper. And okay, what is wrong with it? What can be improved? What can be done better to be inclusive of the LGBTQ plus community, specifically transgender individuals? So I'm going to encourage you all to pause or stop the video right now, take a few minutes, look it over, make the changes you want, or make notes on a piece of paper, and then come back and I'm going to talk about the changes that I made to better improve this form. All right, so now that you're back, attached in the description of this video, this actually isn't in your packet, is a link to the correct form. And again, there might be changes on here that should have been made that I didn't catch, things that would make it more inclusive that I wasn't aware of. But these are just the changes that I made. So starting off at the top, again, you can look at this in the description, a place for someone's name and then their legal name if it is different. The reason why this is important is that while many transgender people, will choose to take a new name, will rename themselves, they might not have access to the funds or the resources to legally change their name, or they might still be in the process of doing that when they come to attend a clinic or a facility or anything like that. So having that space is super important. It allows people to be like, cool, right off the bat, right at the top, you have the name I want to be called. But then if you need, for insurance purposes, billing, anything like that, you also have my legal name. For people who do work in the health and human services industry, something that is really important is to have this name versus legal name on all documents. You want to make sure that, all of the people who are working at, the facility, the clinic, anything like that, know that this is the person's name and this is what they should be called. However, for billing or anything like that, there is their legal name. But there is no reason to ever verbally call someone their legal name if they have a different name. If you need verification of someone's, legal name, you can be like, oh, just for like insurance purposes, I need a copy of your insurance card, I need a copy of your ID, all of those kinds of things. But there's no need to say someone's legal name out loud if their name or preferred name is different. Another change was instead of, the sex, male and female boxes, simply putting gender and putting a blank line there. Again, if you need something, some kind of documentation for, billing and stuff, you can always get a copy of someone's ID or their insurance card. But if, you're talking about someone's gender, it's best to leave a blank line. People who are cisgender will just write male or female, but it gives the opportunity for transgender and non-binary individuals to use whatever language they wish to describe their gender to you. And this is super important. It's super inclusive, and it's so simple. When you just have those boxes, there are so many different gender identities and expressions and experiences. It's so much easier to have a blank line and allow people to use the words that they want instead of trying to, limit people to boxes. Another thing that I included on this updated form is pronouns. I think this is super important. It signifies to transgender clients or just queer clients in general that, this facility cares about being inclusive. They care about people's, preferences, and they are well versed in being inclusive to the LGBTQ plus community. In addition, something that I changed, instead of husband or wife, it says partner or spouse at the bottom. And also in addition to that, marital status added partner. While thankfully gay marriage is legal in all 50 US states, part of gay culture for a long time has been, okay, we're not going to get legally married, but we are life partners. And so having that partnered box is also inclusive of people who might have, a different kind of relationship than you're used to. Because there's a big difference between being single, being partnered, and then being married, where married is more of a legal term. In my own situation, I have a partner. We are long-term partners. We are committed to each other, but we are not married. So that box doesn't apply to us. And so that is a way, to be more inclusive. So moving on, we're going to move on to the scenarios. And this is part of Test Your Knowledge number 2. The preface page looks like this, and the scenarios look like this. So, instructions for Test Your Knowledge number 2. This is an activity designed to test your knowledge and sensitivity surrounding serving transgender individuals in personal and professional settings. On the following page, you will find a list of scenarios that you may experience or may have already experienced. I'm going to say these all out loud, one at a time. And, normally, if we were doing this presentation in person, I'd call on people, ask for people's opinions. And this, I'm just going to be talking about, what I think the best thing to do in this situation is as a transgender person who has experienced a lot of these things. So Moving on to scenario number 1. A fellow staff member is making comments that are homophobic and transphobic, and these comments are making other people uncomfortable. You're not sure of the staff member's intent, nor are you quite sure if the staff member realizes what they're saying is offensive. What would you do? I definitely would encourage you to take a moment, between scenarios, pause, think about what you would do, maybe write it down, journal about it. For me, what I would recommend doing in this situation, if someone is making homophobic or transphobic comments, especially in a large group, if you feel comfortable doing so, it might be best to call someone out, in that situation. You don't have to be rude or mean, but you could say, hey, what you're saying is kind of offensive. Can you stop? Or, hey, what you're saying is homophobic or transphobic or bigoted, that's not really something that's appropriate in the workplace. Something else that may be an option if you don't feel it's okay or appropriate to call them out in that moment, pull them aside later and be like, hey, some of the things you're saying are offensive, they are wrong, they are hurtful and hateful, and you really shouldn't be saying those kinds of things, whether that is in a personal or professional place. And then, if that person is, receptive as they should be, then great. They've learned, you've given them a learning experience, and you can just move on. If this person is combative or says that they're going to stop and then doesn't, then you should definitely take that to a manager or someone at a higher position. Even if this person, is above you, let's say it's not a fellow staff member, say it's your manager, go to HR, go to human resources, and talk about this, because this isn't, the kind of talk or, actions that should be allowed or permitted in the workplace environment. Moving on to scenario number 2. You have just made acquaintance with someone new. The person introduces themselves as Alex, but you're not sure of their gender or what pronouns they use. What would you do? So again, you could take a moment, pause, think about this, write down what you would do. In this situation, what I would recommend, you can simply ask, someone introduces themselves, oh, hi, I'm Alex. Immediately you're like, oh, like I'm unsure of this person's gender. I don't know their pronouns. You should introduce yourself with your pronouns and ask for theirs in return. Oh, hi, I'm Alex. Oh, hi, I'm Aislinn. I use he, him pronouns. What pronouns do you use? In this, scenario might seem appropriate. Honestly, in every scenario, I think it is, a good idea, when introducing yourself, whether you are transgender or cisgender or non-binary or any variation thereupon, just, hi, my name is so-and-so, and I use such and such pronouns. What are your pronouns? This is great. This can be used when first meeting someone, even if you've known someone for, a while or been acquainted with someone before, and you're not sure of their pronouns. Offer yours and ask theirs in return. Make it as, commonplace and courteous as asking for someone's name. Moving on to scenario number 3, you have just made an acquaintance with someone new. The person introduces themselves as Adriana. Adriana has long hair and wears makeup, and you assume Adriana is a woman who uses she, her pronouns. Later, Adriana tells you that they are non-binary and use they, them pronouns. How would you respond? Again, you can pause, take a moment. I think something that's really important to know is that, there is not one way to look transgender. There's not one way where, you are going to be able to tell if someone is transgender or non-binary based solely on their appearance or how they dress. In the situation with Adriana, they use they, them pronouns. And so something that, is super important if someone is disclosing this to you, whether in a group of other people or pulling you aside, being like, oh, actually, like I use they, them pronouns, I'm non-binary. The best thing to do is like, oh, like, I am so sorry. Like I used the wrong pronouns for you before, but I didn't know. Like, thank you so much for telling me. And I'll make sure to, use your right pronouns in the future. It's as simple as that. It's as easy as that. You don't need to make a big deal out of it or apologize profusely and make a big scene. It's not necessary. A simple, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I'll make sure to do that, and use those pronouns in the future. That's all you need. A very simple, courteous conversation. Scenario number 4. An individual you work with regularly shares with you that they are gay. They tell you that they are nervous to tell others in the office and are worried how it may affect the promotion they're hoping to get. How would you respond? You could pause if you'd like, take a moment, think. With this scenario, understand that if this or a similar situation happens, this person is being vulnerable with you. Clearly, this is something that they are not, super out about. It's not something that everybody knows. So understand, the position that you are in. You should affirm that person. If they come to you and they're disclosing this to you, you're like, hey, like, I'm gay and like I haven't told people around the office yet, and like I'm not sure if I should. I'm not sure if I should talk about my life or my like husband or my partner. And I also don't know how it'll affect the promotion that I'm hoping to get and all of those kinds of things. You should be like, oh, like I didn't know, or like I wasn't aware of this information, but thank you for telling me. I think if you want to share it with the office, you can. You definitely don't have to if you don't want to. But if it's something you want to do, I support you and I'm here for you. And as far as a promotion, hopefully your company has anti-discrimination policies. And if they do, you can remind the person of that. And if, they don't, be like, hey, like, I don't think that, your sexuality should affect your promotion. But also, if you're at a company where someone coming out as gay or transgender would affect them getting a promotion, that might be something that you should talk with this person about, and something you should, think about yourself. Oh, I'm working for this company, and someone coming out as being a member of the LGBTQ plus community may affect their employment. How do I feel about that? How do I feel about continuing to work for a company like that? Is there something I can do to make a change? Especially if you are a straight or cisgender person, as coming from a place of privilege, and there was something I can do to make the workplace or this environment more accepting. And moving on to the final scenario number 5. You are working with a young client aged 14 on issues relating to anxiety. This client is a transgender girl who goes by the name Talia and uses she, her pronouns. Talia's mother, Selah, always refers to Talia by her birth name, Yosef, and uses he, him pronouns in reference to Talia. Talia has already come out to her mother, her friends, and her classmates, but her mother refuses to acknowledge Talia's gender as female. Selah then tells you to stop calling Talia by her chosen name and to stop referring to Talia as female. What might you do? In this situation, something that's really important to know, especially if this scenario applies to you directly as a health and human services worker, your client is not the mother. Your client is Talia. The mother is exuding, abusive and unhealthy behavior and not accepting, Talia as who she is. And this does not mean you have to be combative with Selah, does not mean you have to be rude to Selah, but that is something you should talk with her about. Like, listen, first and foremost, Talia is my patient. Her mental health and her well-being is my concern. And there's nothing wrong with being transgender. Talia understands herself. And so, I hear your concerns, but I'm going to keep referring to Talia as Talia and using she, her pronouns. And I think it also might be worth having a conversation with Selah's mother about, why do you feel this way? Why do you not want to accept your child? And kind of helping Selah and Talia work together to work through these issues. Another addendum here in the scenarios is if Selah informs you that her refusal to acknowledge Talia's gender is due to the family's Mormon faith, how does that change your response? And my answer to that personally is that it shouldn't. People are allowed to obviously, have whatever religion they want. Religious freedom is a great thing. But, if that is Selah's belief, if Selah is Mormon and, doesn't view, transgender people in a positive light, she has that right to have that religious freedom. But her child also has, a right to her own happiness. Her daughter has a right to, be who she is and be honest about that. And that does not mean that she has to agree with Selah's beliefs. Again, in this scenario, first and foremost, Talia is the patient. Talia is the client, and her health and well-being are the most important. And when it comes to transgender youth, the most important thing is affirming those, children in their gender identity and calling them what they wish to be called, because it does no detriment and it does no harm. So that is the end of this video. The video after this is just going to kind of be a wrap up and a final notice. But thank you so much for watching these videos, for watching this presentation, and I hope you will watch the next one.